So I don't really do my seeds by the book. I do them my own way, and that's what I'm going to show you. I like to do my seedlings in these trays. So they come in like a really hard bottom tray. And what I like about these is they're easy to move. If I filled this with soil and it had no tray, it bends every time I wanted to move it to water it or move it into the sun or the shade or whatever. It's going to bend and it's going to damage the root structure of the plants. So I love using the little hard trays, and I reuse the same ones year after year so they last a long time. What I also like about them are the holes are a pretty decent size. They're a pretty decent hole. You want to avoid the ones with really little holes that the packets are really flimsy. These aren't good for the environment and they don't last. You can't really reuse these over and over. So avoid these. So what's crazy about seeds is a packet of seed only costs you a few dollars, and depending on what brand and what kind of seed, you can get anywhere between a few hundred seeds to thousands. So $3 goes a long way. You can invest in $15 worth of green seeds and it's going to last you years. So I like to use a premium potting mix to start my seeds. So the reason I like using a premium potting mix is because the potting mix has more oomph and more nutrients in it than a seed starting mix would have. So historically, I've tried a seed raising mix before, a few different types, and I felt like they didn't have enough like nutrients in the soil to then feed my seedlings. So I don't actually feed my seedlings anything. Once I sow them, I don't fertilize them. They don't need it. They've got all they need in the premium potting mix. The thing with premium potting mix is I generally have it anyway for putting on house plants or whatever. So I have it lying around a lot of the time. And seed raising mix is expensive. So all I do is fill my tray with premium potting mix. First important rule of mine is I filled them to the top with premium potting mix. Now the second important thing is moisture. So seeds need moisture to germinate. Lettuce seeds are teeny tiny, so what I like to do is I like to wet my soil down first before I sow any. I'm going to give this a nice deep hose down with the hose and make the soil nice and wet. Now we can pop our seeds on top. I highly recommend labeling, especially if you've never grown food before and you're not sure how to tell the difference between rocket or lettuce or your different varieties. So I recommend you label if you want to. I'm not going to bother because I know I'm going to know the difference. The third rule is the seeds are really delicate. They're really tiny seeds. So if you tried to grow lettuce seeds before and you failed, it could be because they were buried too far underneath the soil. So a little seed sowing magic trick is to sow your seed no deeper than double the size of the seed itself. So if you have a seed that's 1 centimeter, you want to sow them no more than 2 centimeters under the ground. So our lettuce seeds are so tiny, if we bury them too deep, we're never going to see them again. Look how tiny they are. So if I was to bury those 1 centimeter under the soil, they're probably going to go moldy and die under there. So we just want to sprinkle them on top. So because I'm doing a few different varieties, I'm going to sow them in strips, one variety in a line, another variety in a line, another variety in a line. So all I'm going to do is just sprinkle as sparingly as possible. We don't want to sow too many. So I'll try and sow no more than like 6 seeds in a hole for now, if I can. It's very difficult because they're so tiny. If we sow too many, we're only going to have to thin them out later. So I'm going to do about aim for 6 in each hole to start with. If you do find any really big chunks of wood chip or whatever right on top of your soil, just remove them if you see any really massive chunks. Here's the trick. I do like to put a little thin layer on top, but not too much. So I'll grab the premium potting mix and I'll use a spare tray like a sieve, and I'll just sieve a thin layer of soil over the top. Works so good. You could use a sieve from inside if you want to. I'll show you this. This is why I do it. It works so good. Obviously, your potting mix needs to be dry. If your potting mix is wet, it's not going to work as well. It's all going to be like wet and soggy and stuck together and you won't be able to sieve it. So it works well with dry potting mix. Look at that. You've got all the chunks in the tray. And then you've got this beautiful fine soil just lightly on top of the seeds. You can imagine if all this chunky stuff was on top of the seeds, they'd be struggling to pop up out of the soil. That's definitely one of my little secret weapons with doing delicate seeds. So green seeds, celeries, even some herbs that are really delicate, this trick works really well. Next step, we need to wet it down again, but only a sprinkle. We don't want to drown them, and our seeds don't need too much moisture to germinate. If we wet them too much, they risk going moldy and rotting underneath the soil. And if we don't give them enough, they don't have the moisture they need to germinate. Second thing is I only like to go for a mist over the top at this point, because if I use my shower setting on my hose, I have the potential to power blast all my seedlings off the top, because remember, they're just right on top. They're just basically sitting on top of the soil with a very light covering. So if I was to go through and hose this heavily, I might lose my seeds. So I like to go in with a mist. Next important thing is warmth. So seeds need warmth to germinate. So depending where you live and what time of year you are, and how hot it is or how cold it is where you are, will determine whether you need to keep them warm or whether they'll be okay outside. I'm right at the start of autumn where I am. We're still getting heaps of sunny days and the night times aren't that cold. So I'm actually not going to do anything. So I'm going to pop my seed tray in a sunny, warm spot where it gets all morning sun right up to the early afternoon. And I think it's going to be plenty warm enough for me to germinate, for the seeds to pop up on their own. If I was in winter where I am, or if I was in a really cold climate, then I like to use the tubs as little mini greenhouse. So I just pop the tray in with the lid on for a couple of days, say for about 3 or 4 days until they sprout, and then they can come out. If you're in a hot climate or it's still warm and sunny where you are, then you have the potential to fry your seeds in the tub. It can get super, super hot in the tub. It's like a little mini greenhouse. So heat can kill seeds. So if you're in a cold climate, then you can consider putting them in a warm, sunny window inside if it's super cold outside, or you can use my little tub trick to help germinate them. Here's a little medium sort of bonus hack for you. If you've got warm, sunny days, but then your night times are cold, what you can actually do is just leave the seed tray out in the warm spot during the day, and then at night, just come through and tip the tub upside down on top. That's going to help keep them nice and warm in the nighttime. I don't need to do that because it's not cold enough here, but if you are in a frosty kind of environment, it might help germinate them just a little faster. Final thing to consider is moisture. So like I mentioned, we want to keep the seeds moist. So going through with a little mist on top is going to help keep them moist. Again, it depends on your weather. If you've got the sun out, these trays are going to dry out. So definitely you're going to want to give them a water each morning to keep them nice and moist. And just make sure when you water them, you go in gently so you don't disrupt the seeds. If you're in a cold climate, you might find that these don't need water at all. So you'll know when they dry out because the soil on top is going to go much lighter in color. You're going to be able to see that soil's dry. If the soil's nice and dark and moist, then you don't need to water. We don't want to overwater them. It's been exactly 1 week since I sowed the green seeds. They've all popped up, and this is stage 1 of our seedlings. So these are basically like little baby seedlings at this stage. They're not ready to go out into the ground yet. Even though they've popped up green, they don't have any true leaves. So you'll notice on your seedlings, they've only got 2 little baby leaves. There's a scientific name for these. I just call them baby leaves. Call them what they are, they're baby leaves. So that you've got 2 little soft little baby leaves. The true leaves of the plant haven't started to come through yet. So they need probably another week or so outside, and they should form true leaves by next week. And actually, this is a really good time to thin our seedlings out. I just realized I'm wearing the same t-shirt from last week. That wasn't planned. This can be my greens t-shirt. So like I mentioned, this is a really good time to thin out our seedlings. I mentioned last week that you want to be careful not to sow too many seeds in each hole, or you'll have to thin them out. So even though I was careful and I only sowed about 6 in each hole, I've had really good germination, and you can see pretty much it appears like all of them have germinated except for this variety here is a little sparse, but my other 3 varieties have germinated really well. And what it means is if I leave all these seedlings clumped together, they're not going to have enough of their own space to create a nice, healthy, strong seedling. Basically, we don't want any more than about 4 seedlings in each hole. So in this strip here that haven't had very much germination, I don't need to do anything to. But these ones here have had a really solid germination rate, and in some of the holes there's too many seedlings. So what I would do is leave a maximum of 4 seedlings in each hole, and I just choose the odd one. You can either pull them out while they're really small, or you can use your fingernail and just snip them off at the base. So there's still multiple lettuces in each hole, but they've now got their own space and a bit more room to get bigger. So now that they've sprouted, I just need to make sure that they don't dry out too much. I can go in and give these a gentle water. These are still really delicate, so you still don't really want to put your hose on the spray setting just yet, or you might power blast your baby seedlings. So going in with a mist is a good way. If you're in a hot climate, like, the sun's out, it's going to be maybe 25 today or something. If I water this in the morning and leave it out in the sunshine, this is probably going to be pretty dry by the afternoon. So if you are in a hot climate and you're not going to be home to keep the water up to these, you can put about 1 centimetre of water in one of the tubs that we use to cover them, fill it with water, and set the tray in a very small amount of water. If you're worried about them on a hot day, it's going to help keep the moisture up to them. And I would just be making sure that I'm taking the tray out of the wet tub in the night time, or it can increase the risk of disease. So I would only use that strategy if it is going to be hot and I'm not going to be home. And I wouldn't be having them sat in water all through the night time when the temperatures dip too much. Before I get started, a little apology on the noise. It's a little noisy here today. You might be able to hear machinery. So these are little lettuce seedlings. So it's exactly 2 weeks since we planted them, or since we sowed them, and they're looking fabulous. So yours might be a little bigger than mine, depending on how much sun and what your weather's been like. The challenge when they're this small is managing the sunshine and the heat. So greens, like I mentioned earlier, are a cooler weather veggie. They really don't like the heat that much. So when you are planting them towards the end of summer, or even in autumn, if you're in a warm climate, if you've sowed them in autumn, here in Australia, we can still get like quite hot sunny days through autumn. So it's been a challenge giving them enough sun without having them fry in the heat. So my plan of attack for these is to have a look at the weather a week ahead, and on days where it's cloudy, like today, it's really cloudy and mild. It's not too hot. The sun's not out. It's quite overcast. These are going to go out in the full sun. They'll manage a full day in the sun quite well. And I'll just give them a really good drink before I put them out, and I'll check them in the afternoon and give them a nice deep drink if they've dried out through the day. If you're having quite sunny days, then my suggestion would be to pop them, like we have done so far, in the sun in the morning, so somewhere where they're going to get morning sun, and then in the shade in the afternoon. By this point, you might start to notice true leaves popping up on your little lettuces. So these are the real leaves, the real actual lettuce leaves. They're not baby leaves anymore. So once they start forming true leaves, at this size, they're okay to plant out. I like to let my greens get a little bit bigger before I plant them out, because they seemed safer here in their chance of pests out in the big wide world. So I like to let them get a bit bigger before I plant them if I can. Although I have planted them this size before, you can do it. But if you want to be sure or give them a better chance at surviving a pest attack, perhaps give them an extra week. Speaking of pests, now's a great opportunity to give your seedlings a good look over and check the backs of leaves for little yellow eggs. Caterpillars, unfortunately, cabbage moth and caterpillar will come and lay eggs on your seedlings. So now that they're starting to get leaves on them, it's a great opportunity to have a look at the backs of your leaves and squish or wipe off any small yellow oval sized eggs that you see on the back of your leaves. And you really want to be checking them at least twice a week, because cabbage moth egg take around 5 days to hatch. So from the time a butterfly comes and lays their egg on your little seedlings, you have 5 days to wipe it off before it turns into a caterpillar. And because these are so tiny, once caterpillars hatch, they're going to actually eat them quite fast because our seedlings are so small. So there's a little tip for you, and hopefully you can get them through to seedling size and protect them from the pests over the next week.